Take off that uniform right now, immediately. Lieutenant Jake Morrison's voice thundered across the Fort Thunder training grounds, cutting through the 47 degrees C Arizona heat like a blade through butter. Emma Hayes, a 38-year-old woman with light brown hair tied in a simple bun, stood motionless among 30 elite soldiers who were already laughing at the confrontation. Her faded BDUs looked like they'd seen better days, worn at the edges and patched in places that suggested years of hard use. I said, "Take it off. Civilians have no right wearing military uniforms." Jake stepped forward, his face flushed red with anger, his finger pointing at Emma like a weapon. The muscular lieutenant towered over her small frame, using his 6'4" height to intimidate. Emma slowly set her worn backpack on the ground, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from old nerve damage that had plagued her for years. As she began unbuttoning her jacket, the laughter from the young soldiers grew louder, mocking what they saw as a weak old woman being put in her place. But when the jacket slipped down in the scorching desert sun, the entire training ground froze, as if time itself had stopped. Across Emma's back and shoulders, a massive tattoo emerged, a black skull with the Roman numeral 2 beneath it, the words, "Death Brigade, Sole Survivor," and 12 blood-red stars arranged in a circle. Master Sergeant Viktor Vulov, the seasoned Spetsnaz advisor, was the first to recognize its significance. His face drained of color, his legs trembling before he dropped to his knees, right in the middle of the training ground. But within 30 minutes, all 30 arrogant soldiers would understand why a hardened combat veteran had just knelt before the woman they had insulted. The morning had started like any other at Fort Thunder Special Operations Training Center, the premier facility for selecting candidates for the military's most dangerous missions. Located deep in the Arizona desert, the base was designed to break people down and rebuild them into weapons capable of surviving impossible odds. The temperature was already climbing past 45 degrees by 0700 hours, and the 30 candidates for the Special Operations Selection Course were gathering for their morning briefing when Emma Hayes arrived. She had parked her old pickup truck in the visitor's lot, the vehicle's paint faded and peeling from years under harsh suns. Everything about her appearance suggested she didn't belong here among the elite warriors. Her boots were scuffed, resoled at least twice from the look of them. Her uniform bore no unit patches, no rank insignia, just the tired fabric of someone who'd worn it too many times. The tremor in her hands was noticeable as she signed in at the gate. The guard, barely glancing at her contractor credentials before waving her through. Private Jessica Stone was the first to notice her, immediately pulling out her phone to start a live stream. "Oh my God, guys, you have to see this," she whispered to her followers. The camera focused on Emma's approaching figure. "Some old lady just showed up to our special ops selection wearing BDUs that look like she bought them at a thrift store. This is going to be hilarious." Jessica, 24 years old, with perfectly styled blonde hair even in the desert heat, had built a following documenting her journey through elite military training. She saw Emma as perfect content, a civilian contractor who clearly didn't understand where she was. Sergeant Kyle Rodriguez joined in the mockery, his technical expertise making him the acknowledged expert among the younger soldiers. At 28, he'd already completed 2 deployments and considered himself an authority on all things tactical. $10 says she's here to teach us sensitivity training or some administrative nonsense," he called out to his buddies, loud enough for Emma to hear. "Look at those hands shaking. Probably can't even hold a rifle steady." Emma's expression didn't change as she walked past them, her gait steady despite the slight tremor that affected her movements. She made her way to the equipment area where the morning's training gear was being prepared and began a methodical inspection of the weapons laid out for the exercise. Her movements were precise, professional. each rifle checked with an economy of motion that spoke of long practice. Corporal Brad Tucker watched her with growing amusement. Known among the candidates for his practical jokes and sabotage tactics during competitive exercises, he saw an opportunity for entertainment. "Watch this," he whispered to his teammates, then deliberately bumped into the table where Emma was working, sending several pieces of equipment clattering to the ground. "Oh, sorry, ma'am," he said with exaggerated politeness. "Didn't see you there. Maybe you should stick to the administrative building where it's safer for civilians." Emma bent to retrieve the scattered equipment, her movements careful but efficient. As she picked up a disassembled rifle component, her fingers moved with surprising speed, checking for damage before setting it back in place. It was a small thing, but Master Sergeant Victor Vulov noticed it from his position near the command post. The way she handled the weapon parts wasn't casual. It was professional, automatic, the kind of muscle memory that came from years of experience. But it was Instructor Mike Davis who decided to escalate the situation. The 35-year-old former Ranger had little patience for what he saw as interference in his training program. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, approaching Emma with the kind of barely concealed contempt that came from dealing with too many civilian contractors who thought they understood military operations. "I think there's been a mistake. This area is restricted to selection candidates and training staff. Whatever administrative work you're here for, it needs to be handled through proper channels." Emma looked up from her equipment inspection, meeting his gaze with calm brown eyes that showed no sign of intimidation. "I'm here on authorization from Colonel Patterson," she said simply, her voice carrying a slight rasp that suggested old damage to her vocal cords. "I'm observing the selection process." "Observing?" Jake Morrison had arrived, drawn by the commotion. The lieutenant's imposing physical presence dominated the space around him, his muscled frame and aggressive posture designed to intimidate. "Lady, do you have any idea where you are? This is a special operations selection course. We're training warriors here, not running a tourist attraction. And what gives you the right to wear that uniform?" The challenge in his voice was unmistakable, and the gathered soldiers began to form a semicircle around them, sensing entertainment. Jake had a reputation for aggressive leadership, the kind of officer who believed that strength came from dominance. At 26, he was young for his rank, but made up for it with sheer physical presence and an unwavering belief in his own superiority. Emma's response was to continue her equipment check, apparently unbothered by the growing hostility. This seeming indifference only fueled Jake's anger. Here was some aging civilian contractor ignoring his direct challenge, acting as if she had a right to be in their space, wearing their uniform. "I'm talking to you." Jake's voice rose to a shout. "That uniform is earned, not borrowed. You're disrespecting every soldier who's bled for the right to wear it. Take it off now." The training ground had gone quiet, except for the sound of Jessica's live stream commentary. "Oh, this is getting good," she whispered to her phone. "Lieutenant Morrison is about to put this wannabe in her place. You can't just show up to an elite military base dressed like a soldier when you're obviously just some desk jockey." Emma finally stopped her inspection and turned to face Jake fully. The morning sun caught the side of her face, revealing a thin scar that ran from her temple down to her jaw, old and faded, but clearly from something traumatic. Her hands continued their slight tremor as she set down the rifle component she'd been examining. "The uniform," she said quietly, "was issued to me." "By who? Some surplus store?" Kyle Rodriguez joined in, earning laughs from the group. "Ma'am, with all due respect, which isn't much, you need to understand something. This isn't a place for civilians to play soldier. We're preparing for real missions here, life or death operations, not whatever corporate team-building exercise you think this is." Brad Tucker had positioned himself behind Emma, ready to add physical intimidation to the verbal assault. He, accidentally kicked her backpack, sending it sliding across the ground. A few items spilled out: a medical kit, some papers, and a small metal case that made a distinctive sound as it hit the concrete. "Oops," Brad said with false concern. "Better be careful with your things. This environment can be pretty harsh for people who aren't prepared for it." Emma knelt to collect her belongings, and as she did, her jacket rode up slightly, revealing just a hint of black ink on her lower back. Viktor Vulov, still observing from his position, felt something stir in his memory. The shape, the style of what little he could see, it reminded him of something. But Jake Morrison wasn't finished. "I gave you an order," he said, stepping closer, using his height advantage to loom over her as she gathered her things. "Remove that uniform. You have no right to wear it. I don't care what civilian contractor badge you're carrying or who you think authorized you to be here. In my training area, you follow my rules." Emma stood slowly, her backpack secured, and met his gaze without flinching. The tremor in her hands seemed more pronounced now, but her eyes remained steady. Around them, the soldiers were pulling out phones, recording what they expected to be a humiliating confrontation. Some were taking bets on how long it would take the old woman to break down and leave. "You want me to remove the uniform?" Emma said, not a question, but a statement. Her fingers moved to the buttons of her jacket with deliberate slowness. "Very well." The anticipation in the air was palpable. 30 elite soldiers, the best of the best, selected from across the military for advanced training, all watching as this seemingly fragile woman began to comply with Jake's demands. Jessica's live stream was attracting viewers by the second, comments flooding in about the stolen valor grandma getting what she deserved. As Emma's jacket came off, revealing a black tank top underneath, the first glimpse of the tattoo became visible. It started at her shoulders, clearly extending down her back. But it wasn't until she turned slightly, the morning sun catching the exposed skin, that the full impact began to register. The tattoo was massive, professional, and unlike anything the young soldiers had ever seen. Military tattoos were common enough, but this was different. This was specific, detailed, and carried a weight of authenticity that no amateur artist could replicate. The skull was rendered in stark black ink, photorealistic in its detail, with the Roman numeral II prominently displayed on its forehead. But it was Viktor Vulov who reacted first, his sharp intake of breath audible even from 20 feet away. His face, weathered by years of combat across multiple continents, had gone pale. His hands, steady enough to have performed surgery under fire, began to shake. And then, to the absolute shock of everyone present, the hardened Spetsnaz advisor dropped to one knee. Emma pulled from her bag a prescription bottle of specialized nerve medication, the kind developed for NASA astronauts, but now used by the military for severe combat-related nerve damage. Each small pill cost $200 and had the ability to prevent seizures caused by nerve damage, consequences from an explosion that had killed 12 of her teammates. This was medication that only those who had been on the other side of death's door were ever prescribed. She dry-swallowed one pill with practiced ease, her movement suggesting this was a daily ritual born of necessity rather than choice. The silence that followed Viktor's action was deafening. 30 elite soldiers, trained to react to any situation, stood frozen in confusion. Jake Morrison's face showed a mix of anger and uncertainty, his challenge momentarily forgotten as he tried to process why their senior advisor had just knelt before the woman he'd been humiliating. "Sergeant Vulov," Mike Davis was the first to speak, his instructor's authority shaken by the unprecedented sight. "What's going on?" But Viktor's eyes remained fixed on Emma, specifically on the tattoo that was now partially visible. His lips moved, forming words that came out as barely a whisper. "Death Brigade. It can't be." The moment stretched, tension building like a storm front moving across the desert. Emma stood perfectly still, neither acknowledging Victor's reaction nor showing any emotion at the sudden shift in dynamics. Her jacket lay folded in her hands, the morning heat already making sweat bead on her exposed skin, causing the tattoo to seem even more vivid. "Get up, Sergeant," Jake ordered, his voice lacking its previous conviction. "What's wrong with you?" Victor slowly raised his head, his eyes moving from the tattoo to Emma's face, studying her features as if seeing her for the first time. "Lieutenant Morrison," he said, his accent thicker than usual, stress cracking his normally perfect English. "You need to stop right now. You don't understand what you're dealing with." "It's a tattoo," Jessica said, her live stream still running, but her voice uncertain now. "So what? Lots of people have military tattoos. It doesn't mean anything." Kyle Rodriguez had moved closer, his technical knowledge making him curious about the specific design. "That's not just any military tattoo," he said slowly, recognizing some of the symbolism. "That's Special Operations insignia, but I've never seen that unit designation before." Brad Tucker, always ready with a joke, tried to break the tension. "Maybe she got it at the same place she bought the uniform. Stolen valor and all that." "Shut your mouth." Victor's roar silenced everyone. The normally composed advisor was on his feet now, moving toward Brad with frightening intensity. "You ignorant child. You have no idea what that marking means, what it cost, what she—" He stopped himself, visibly struggling for control. The gathered soldiers had never seen him like this, emotional, almost frightened. Viktor Vulov was a legend in his own right, a man who'd survived operations that had killed lesser soldiers, who'd trained with the most elite units in the world. And he was shaking. Emma finally moved, setting her folded jacket on a nearby equipment crate. The full expanse of the tattoo was visible now, and in the bright morning light, every detail could be seen. The 12 red stars that surrounded the skull and designation were rendered with painful precision, each one slightly different, as if they represented individuals rather than mere decoration. Below the main design, in letters that looked like they'd been carved rather than inked, were the words that made Victor's reaction suddenly make sense to those who understood military history. "Sole survivor." Colonel Patterson emerged from the command building, drawn by the commotion. The base commander was a man who'd seen enough in his 48 years to rarely be surprised. But the scene before him, 30 of his best candidates standing in shocked silence while his senior advisor looked like he'd seen a ghost, was unprecedented. "Someone want to explain what's happening here?" Patterson's command voice cut through the confusion. His eyes took in the scene quickly. Emma standing calmly, despite being partially undressed. Jake Morrison looking uncharacteristically uncertain, and Viktor Vulov displaying more emotion than anyone had ever seen from him. "Colonel," Victor said, his voice strained, "we need to clear this area now. This is classified beyond anything these candidates are cleared for." "Sergeant, I'll decide what's classified on my base," Patterson replied. But his tone suggested he was taking the situation seriously. His eyes moved to Emma, taking in the tattoo with professional interest. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your identification. All of it." Emma nodded, reaching for her backpack with movements that were economical despite the tremor in her hands. She pulled out a leather wallet, worn smooth with age, and extracted several documents. But it was the final item she produced that made Patterson's expression change from professional interest to shock. It was a challenge coin, but not just any coin. This one was black with inlaid red enamel and bore the same skull and designation as her tattoo. Only 13 of these coins had ever been made. And after Operation Hellgate, only one person was left alive to carry theirs. "Dear God," Patterson breathed, his composure cracking. "You're her. You're Ghost 7. The name meant nothing to most of the candidates, but Victor's reaction was immediate and visceral. He snapped to attention, rendering a salute so precise it looked like muscle memory taking over conscious thought. "Major Hayes, I didn't recognize you. I'm sorry. I should have known." Did you notice something special about how Emma reacted to all these insults? Drop a comment below if you've ever been underestimated like this. I read them all and want to hear your story. And now, let's see what Emma does next. The revelation hung in the air like a physical presence, but most of the candidates were still confused. Jake Morrison, his earlier aggression replaced by uncertainty, was the first to voice what many were thinking. "Major, what's going on here? Who is Ghost 7? Emma finally spoke, her voice carrying clearly despite its slight rasp. "Someone who shouldn't exist anymore," she said simply. "Someone who was supposed to die with her unit 5 years ago. Death Brigade 2. Operation Hellgate. 13 operators sent on a suicide mission to eliminate a terrorist cell that was planning to detonate dirty bombs in 3 major cities. Intelligence said there were 50 hostiles. There were 200. The candidates were listening now. Their phones lowered, live streams forgotten. This wasn't the humiliation of a civilian contractor anymore. This was something else entirely, something that was making their instructors react in ways they'd never seen. 13 went in, Victor continued. 1 came out, but not before completing the mission, not before holding a defensive position alone for 6 hours after the rest of her unit was killed. Ghost 7, the last of Death Brigade. Emma's hand moved unconsciously to her side where, beneath her tank top, other scars were visible. Bullet wounds, shrapnel damage, the physical reminders of a night that had become legend in special operations circles. The tremor in her hands, they realized now, wasn't from age or weakness. It was nerve damage from the explosion that had killed her entire team. Jake Morrison's face had gone through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally something approaching horror as he realized what he'd done. He'd publicly humiliated, insulted, and ordered around one of the most decorated special operations soldiers in recent history, a woman who'd survived what 13 elite operators couldn't. "But," Kyle Rodriguez said, his technical mind still trying to process the information, "Death Brigade was classified beyond top secret. Those operations never happened officially. How do we know?" He was cut off by Emma pulling up her tank top, just enough to show her left side. There, in neat rows, were 12 small star tattoos, each with initials beneath them. Jackson, Martinez, Chen, Williams, Brown, Thompson, Garcia, Anderson, Taylor, Wilson, Moore, Davis. She recited each name from memory, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. 12 stars for 12 brothers who didn't make it home. 12 reminders of why I'm still here. The silence that followed was profound. These young soldiers, elite as they were faced with something beyond their experience. They trained for dangerous missions, prepared for the possibility of death. But here was someone who had faced it, survived it, and carried the weight of being the only one who did. "Ma'am, we didn't know." Mike Davis found his voice first. "You weren't supposed to," Emma replied. "My identity has been classified for 5 years for the safety of ongoing operations and the protection of assets still in the field." She turned to Patterson. "Colonel, I believe we need to have a conversation about why I'm really here." Patterson nodded slowly. "Clear the training ground," he ordered. "All candidates, report to Barracks 3 for standby. Senior staff, my office in 15 minutes. But Jake Morrison stepped forward. "Wait," he said, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "I need to. Ma'am, Major Hayes, I'm sorry. What I said, what I did, you acted on the information you had." Emma cut him off. "You saw a civilian contractor out of place and challenged it. That's what you're trained to do." She paused, looking around at all of them. "But maybe now you'll understand that not everything is as it appears. Not everyone who looks weak is, and not everyone who seems strong will be there when it counts. The candidates began to disperse, but their movements were slow, reluctant. Jessica Stone had long since stopped her live stream, her face pale as she realized she'd been mocking someone whose service record would make her own aspirations look like children's games. Brad Tucker, the joker who'd kicked Emma's bag, looked like he might be sick. As the training ground cleared, Victor approached Emma with careful steps. "Major, may I ask, why are you here? After everything, why come back to this?" Emma looked out across the desert, the heat shimmer already making the horizon dance. "Because Death Brigade 3 is being formed," she said quietly, "and someone needs to select them. Someone who understands what we're asking them to do." Victor's intake of breath was sharp. "Another suicide mission." "A nuclear facility," Emma confirmed. "Terrorist-controlled, hardened defenses, minimal chance of extraction." She turned to face him. 13 volunteers needed, and I need to know they understand what they're signing up for. That's why I came here like this. Let them show me who they really are when they think no one important is watching." "And what did you see?" Patterson asked, having returned after issuing his orders. Emma's smile was sad, tinged with the weight of experience. "I saw potential, and I saw problems. But mostly, I saw young soldiers who haven't yet learned that the hardest battles aren't always against the enemy. Sometimes they're against our own assumptions." She moved to collect her jacket, her movements still careful, still managing the constant tremor that was her reminder of Hellgate. As she pulled it back on, covering the tattoo that had changed everything, she added, "I need 30 minutes to contact the Pentagon. Then we'll discuss which of these candidates might be suitable for what's coming." As she walked toward the command building, flanked by Patterson and Victor, the weight of what had just happened settled over Fort Thunder like a physical presence. 30 elite soldiers had just learned that their morning harassment of a seemingly weak civilian contractor had actually been their first test for selection into something far more serious than they had imagined. And they'd failed, In her quarters an hour later, Emma sat before a secure communications terminal, her trembling fingers steady enough to input the complex authorization codes required for her level of clearance. The face that appeared on the screen was General Patricia Morrison, no relation to the lieutenant who'd confronted her despite the shared surname. "Ghost 7, the general said without preamble. "Report." "Initial assessment complete," Emma replied. 30 candidates observed under stress conditions. 5 showed potential aggression that could be channeled. 3 demonstrated technical skills worth developing. 1 showed protective instincts that might be valuable. And the others, followers. Emma said simply, "They'll go along with whatever the strongest personality in the room decides. That makes them dangerous in the wrong situation." The general nodded. "Your recommendation?" "I want to run them through secondary assessment, but not standard exercises. I need to see how they react when they think a teammate is in genuine danger, when they have to choose between following orders and doing what's right." "Approved. You have full authority to structure the selection as you see fit." "Emma," the general's professional mask slipped slightly, "are you sure about this? After Hellgate, no one would blame you for walking away." Emma's hand moved unconsciously to her side, where the stars marked her lost team. "Someone has to select them, Patricia. Someone who understands the cost. Who better than the one who's already paid it?" The connection ended, leaving Emma alone with her thoughts. Through her window, she could see the candidates gathering in small groups, undoubtedly discussing the morning's revelations. She wondered how many of them understood that they'd already begun the real selection process, that every action from here forward would be weighted against a standard they couldn't imagine. Death Brigade had always been different from other special operations units. It wasn't just about skill or courage, or even the willingness to die for the mission. It was about understanding that sometimes the mission required everything: your life, your identity, your very existence erased in service of something greater. 13 had understood that when they'd entered that compound 5 years ago, 13 had made peace with death before they'd even boarded the helicopters, and one had survived to carry the weight of their sacrifice. Now, she needed to find 13 more who could do the same. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called, not turning from the window. Jake Morrison stepped into the room, his earlier swagger replaced by something more subdued. He stood at attention, waiting for acknowledgement. "Lieutenant," Emma said, finally turning to face him. "You're out of uniform." Jake looked down at himself in confusion, then realized she was referring to his attitude rather than his clothing. "Ma'am, I came to apologize properly. What I did this morning was exactly what I expected," Emma interrupted. "You're aggressive, dominant, used to being the apex predator in any room. It's served you well in your career so far." She studied him with eyes that had seen too much. "Tell me, Lieutenant Morrison, have you ever been afraid? Truly afraid?" Jake's jaw tightened. "Yes, ma'am. First deployment. Convoy hit an IED. Lost 2 good men. And how did you react?" "I froze for maybe 3 seconds. Then training took over. We secured the scene, called for medevac, maintained security until extraction arrived." Emma nodded. 3 seconds. "Do you know how long I froze when the compound exploded at Hellgate?" Jake shook his head. 0, Emma said quietly. "Because I'd already accepted that I was dead the moment we entered that valley. When you've made peace with death, fear becomes irrelevant. The question is, can you operate in that space? Can you function knowing that survival isn't part of the mission parameters?" The lieutenant was silent for a long moment. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "That's the first honest thing you've said to me," Emma observed. "It's a start. If this moment is giving you chills, share this video with someone who needs to see that strength comes in unexpected forms. The reveal coming up will change everything." The afternoon sun was brutal as Emma made her way back to the training ground, now dressed in proper military attire that bore her actual rank insignia. The candidates had been assembled, standing in formation despite the 115-degree heat. Their faces showed a mix of curiosity, apprehension, and in some cases, genuine fear. Emma took her position at the front, her movements precise despite the ever-present tremor. Behind her, Colonel Patterson and the senior staff formed a semicircle of authority that made the gravity of the situation clear. "Gentlemen," Emma began, her voice carrying across the formation. "And ladies," she added, nodding to Jessica and the 3 other female candidates. "This morning, you witnessed what happens when assumptions meet reality. You made judgments based on appearance, on perceived weakness, on your own biases. In a normal training environment, that would result in corrective instruction and move on." She paused, letting the heat and the silence work on them. "But this isn't normal training. You've been selected as potential candidates for a mission that, statistically speaking, you won't survive. Death Brigade isn't just a name. It's a promise. A promise that you'll complete the objective regardless of cost. That you'll keep fighting when everyone else is dead. That you'll make decisions no human should have to make in service of a greater good." Movement in the formation caught her eye. Private First Class Maria Santos, one of the quieter candidates, who'd stayed back during the morning's confrontation, had raised her hand. "Yes, Private. Ma'am, why tell us this? If the mission is classified, why reveal its nature?" Emma's smile was grim. "Because lying to you would be worse. You deserve to know what you're volunteering for. Death Brigade has had 14 iterations over the past 20 years. Average survival rate is 15%. My unit was an anomaly. We had 7% survival. Me." She pulled out a tablet, swiping through until an image appeared on the screen behind her. It showed 13 people in tactical gear, faces obscured by balaclavas, standing in front of a helicopter. The photo was dated March 5, 2011. 2 days after this photo was taken, 12 of these operators were dead. Not from failure. They completed the mission, eliminated over 200 hostiles who were planning to kill thousands of civilians. But the intelligence was wrong about enemy strength, about reinforcements, about everything except the location of the targets. Emma touched the screen, and individual photos appeared, faces now visible, human beings rather than just operators. Staff Sergeant Marcus Jackson, sniper, could put a bullet through a playing card at 1,000 meters, died holding the east entrance while I tried to stabilize Williams. Sergeant First Class Luis Martinez, demolitions, best technical mind I've ever worked with, used his body to shield the rest of us from a grenade. Corporal David Chen, comm specialist, maintained contact with command until a sniper's bullet took him mid-sentence. They weren't heroes because they died. They were heroes because they knew death was likely and went anyway. Because the mission, stopping those dirty bombs from reaching Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York, mattered more than their lives. The formation was utterly still, the reality of what was being discussed sinking in. So, Emma continued, the question each of you needs to answer is simple. Are you willing to be forgotten? To have your sacrifice classified? Your family told you died in a training accident? Your name erased from everything except a wall in a building that doesn't officially exist? Silence stretched until Jake Morrison stepped forward. Ma'am, permission to speak. Granted. This morning, I showed you disrespect, poor judgment, aggression without purpose. He paused, visibly struggling with the words. But I also showed you who I am under stress. No filters, no pretense. If that's what this selection is really about, seeing who we are when we think no one's watching, then you've seen me at my worst. And I'm still here, still willing, because if terrorists have nuclear material, if American cities are at risk, then someone has to stop them. Might as well be someone who's already proven he can make bad calls. Means I've got room to improve. Emma studied him for a long moment. Step back in formation, Lieutenant. Over the next hour, she laid out the parameters of the real selection. It wouldn't be about physical fitness or tactical skills. Those were assumed at this level. It would be about psychological resilience, moral flexibility, and the ability to function when everything went wrong. Tomorrow, she announced, we begin with Scenario Alpha. You'll be divided into teams of 5. Each team will face a situation where the mission parameters conflict with survival instincts, where doing the right thing tactically means accepting casualties, where you'll have to choose who lives and who dies based on mission necessity, not personal bonds. She pulled out a specialized communication device. Its quantum encryption capabilities far beyond what these candidates had access to. The screen displayed coded coordinates, the location of the nuclear facility that Death Brigade 3 would have to infiltrate and destroy. This is what we're training for. A hardened facility in hostile territory. Current intelligence suggests a garrison of 300 fighters, air defenses that make aerial insertion impossible, and a deadline 6 weeks from now before the material inside can be weaponized. Ma'am, Kyle Rodriguez spoke up, his technical mind already working the problem. With those parameters, extraction would be impossible, Emma confirmed. Which is why this is a Death Brigade mission. The plan isn't to get you out. It's to get you in, complete the objective, and hold long enough for conventional forces to arrive. Estimated time, 8 to 10 hours. 10 hours against 300 hostiles. Brad Tucker's usual joking manner was nowhere to be found. My team held for 6 against 200, Emma said simply. Of course, there were 13 of us for the first 20 minutes. The math was brutal in its simplicity. Even if they performed as well as the legendary 2, most of them would die in the first hour. The survivors would have to continue the mission, probably wounded, definitely outnumbered, with no hope of rescue. Anyone who wants to withdraw from selection can do so now, Patterson announced. No shame, no mark on your record. Death Brigade is volunteer only, and we need people who are certain. For a moment, no one moved. Then, from the back of the formation, someone stepped out. It was Captain Sarah Chen, an intelligence officer who'd been attached to the selection as an observer. "I'm out," she said simply. "I have a daughter. She needs a mother more than the country needs another ghost." Emma nodded respectfully. "Dismissed, Captain. Thank you for your honesty." Two more followed. A sergeant who'd just gotten engaged, a corporal whose parents were elderly and had no other children. Each departure was met with respect, not scorn. This wasn't about courage. It was about choices no one should have to make. When the movement stopped, 27 candidates remained. "Phase 1 begins at 0400 tomorrow," Emma announced. "Get some rest. You'll need it." As the formation dispersed, Victor approached her. "You're going to run them through Hellgate, aren't you?" Emma nodded. "Modified version. They need to understand what it feels like when everything goes wrong. When the intelligence is bad, the support doesn't come, and people start dying around you. And if they break, then they break here, where it's safe, not out there where it matters." That evening, Emma sat alone in the mess hall, her dinner growing cold as she reviewed the candidates' files. Each one represented potential and potential loss. She'd seen their true selves this morning when they thought she was nobody. Now she needed to see who they became when faced with the impossible. Her tablet chimed with an incoming message. The sender was classified, but she recognized the authentication codes. She opened it to find a single line of text. "Package delivered. Hellgate simulation authorized. May God have mercy. Phantom 1. Phantom 1. The commander who'd sent 2 into that valley 5 years ago. Who'd made the call that the dirty bombs were worth 13 lives. Who'd promoted Emma posthumously, only to have to reverse it when she'd somehow survived. Emma closed the tablet and pushed away her untouched meal. Tomorrow, she'd begin the process of selecting 13 people to die. But unlike Hellgate, this time they'd know what they were walking into. This time, they'd choose their fate with open eyes. That had to count for something, didn't it? 400 came fast and brutal. The candidates assembled in the pre-dawn darkness, their breath misting in the desert's surprising cold. Emma stood before them in full tactical gear, her rifle slung and ready, looking every inch the operator she'd once been, despite the tremor that never stopped. "Scenario Alpha," she announced without preamble. "Intelligence indicates a high-value target in a compound 15 clicks north. Friendly asset on site requires extraction. Hostile force estimated at platoon strength. Your mission: infiltrate, locate asset, extract to designated safe house." She paused, meeting eyes with several candidates. What intelligence doesn't tell you is that the asset is wounded, ambulatory but slow. The hostiles aren't platoon strength, they're company strength, and the safe house has been compromised. You'll discover these facts in sequence, forcing decisions about mission continuation. Jake Morrison, leading Alpha Team, raised a hand. "Rules of engagement? Weapons free once you make contact. But remember, every shot fired increases hostile response time. Every casualty you take degrades your capability, and the asset must survive, or the mission fails." The teams loaded into vehicles, driving out to the training area Fort Thunder had modified overnight. As they disappeared into the darkness, Emma turned to the observation post, where monitors would track every movement, every decision, every failure. "Let's see who breaks first," she murmured. The exercise was designed to be unwinnable by conventional metrics. Each team would face the same cascade of deteriorating circumstances, the same impossible choices. But Emma wasn't looking for success. She was looking for something else: the ability to keep functioning when success became impossible, to find victory in the ashes of defeat. Alpha Team made contact first. Jake's voice crackled over the radio. "Alpha 6, we have eyes on the compound. Count 30+ hostiles visible. Requesting permission to..." The explosion cut him off. One of their vehicles had hit an IED, simulated but realistic enough to rattle windows a mile away. In the observation post, Emma watched Jake's biometric readouts spike. Heart rate, blood pressure, stress indicators, all redlining. Alpha 6, this is Alpha 1. We have casualties. Thompson and Rodriguez are down. Continuing mission. Emma made a note. First decision. Continue despite losses. Expected from Jake, but she noticed he'd assigned someone to stay with the wounded rather than abandoning them. Interesting. Bravo team, led by Jessica Stone, took a different approach. Observing the larger-than-expected hostile force, she pulled her team back to reassess. Smart tactically, but Emma started a timer. How long would they wait? How much time would they waste trying to find a perfect solution to an imperfect problem? By 600, the sun was turning the desert into an oven, and all 5 teams had made contact. The casualties mounted. 3 dead, 7 wounded. And every team had discovered that their intelligence was catastrophically wrong. It was Mike Davis's Charlie team that found the asset first and discovered the next complication. The wounded asset was played by a genuine amputee veteran, missing his left leg below the knee, mobility severely limited. The extraction just became exponentially harder. Emma listened to the radio chatter as Charlie team argued. Leave a security element and move fast with the asset. Move as a complete unit but slowly. Split the difference and risk both elements being overrun. In the end, they chose unity and paid for it. The simulated hostile forces, played by Fort Thunder's permanent training cadre, encircled them within minutes. Charlie team found themselves in a running firefight, carrying their asset while casualties mounted. It was brutal to watch, even in simulation. Emma remembered Hellgate, remembered the weight of William's body as she dragged him to cover, only to watch him die anyway. Remembered choosing to leave Jackson's body behind because Martinez was still breathing and might be saved. This morning, you witnessed what happens when assumptions meet reality. Emma thought about her words from yesterday as she watched these elite soldiers struggle with decisions that had no good answers. Now you're learning what happens when reality meets hell. By 0800, 3 of the 5 teams had been effectively eliminated, overwhelmed by superior numbers and cascading complications. Jessica's Bravo team had spent too long planning, arriving at the compound to find the asset already executed by hostiles who'd been alerted by other teams' actions. Jake's Alpha team had fought magnificently, but had been whittled down to just him and 1 other survivor, still trying to complete the mission with pure aggression. It was Delta team, led by the quiet Maria Santos, that surprised everyone. Faced with the same impossible circumstances, Maria had made a different choice. She'd sent 2 of her team to create a diversion, knowing it would likely result in their deaths, but drawing hostile attention. The remaining 3 had infiltrated successfully, found the asset, and then made the coldest decision of all. They'd called in danger-close artillery on their own position. In the observation post, Emma leaned forward, watching Maria's team huddle in a drainage ditch with the asset as simulated artillery rained down around them. The hostile forces were decimated, but the chance of friendly casualties was enormous. Delta 6, this is Control, Emma transmitted personally. Confirm your call for fire. Maria's voice came back steady despite the chaos. Control, Delta 6, confirm danger close. We have hard cover and asset is protected. Hostiles do not. Request immediate suppression. It was exactly what Emma would have done. What she had done at Hellgate, when conventional tactics failed. Sometimes, the only way to win was to make the enemy pay such a price that even your defeat became their catastrophe. When the smoke cleared, Maria's team emerged with the asset intact. 2 of her 5 were dead, 1 wounded, but they'd completed the objective where the others had failed. The debrief that followed was unlike any the candidates had experienced. Emma stood before them, No longer the trembling contractor they had mocked, but a commander evaluating warriors for a mission that would likely kill them. The screens behind her showed footage from each team's exercise, their failures and successes laid bare. "Delta Team," Emma began, her eyes on Maria Santos. "You sacrificed 2 team members to create a diversion. Explain your reasoning." Maria stood at attention, her young face set with determination. "Ma'am, the arithmetic was simple. 2 casualties to save 3 plus the asset versus losing everyone trying to maintain unit integrity. In a real operation, those 2 volunteers would know their sacrifice enabled mission success. And if those 2 were your best friends, your lovers, your family?" Maria's jaw tightened. "Then I'd hope they'd understand that their deaths meant something. Ma'am, that's what we sign up for." Emma nodded slowly, then turned to Jake Morrison. "Alpha Team fought to the last man. Admirable or foolish?" Jake had been wrestling with this question since the exercise ended. "Foolish, ma'am. I let pride override tactics. Should have adapted when the situation changed, not tried to punch through with pure aggression." "But you stayed with your wounded," Emma observed, "even when it compromised your speed." "Leave no one behind," Jake replied immediately. "That's not negotiable." "Even if it means mission failure?" Jake hesitated. "I don't know, ma'am." "Good," Emma said, surprising everyone. Anyone who answers that question easily hasn't thought it through. "At Hellgate, I left Sergeant Davis's body behind because carrying him would have meant Thompson died, waiting for medical attention. I still see Davis's wife sometimes. She still doesn't know her husband's body lay in that valley for 3 days before we could recover it." The room was silent, the weight of real consequences settling over theoretical exercises. Emma continued through each team, dissecting decisions with surgical precision. But she wasn't just evaluating tactics. She was watching how they handled criticism, how they processed failure, how they internalized lessons written in simulated blood. When the debrief ended, Emma made an announcement that sent ripples through the candidates. "Individual evaluations begin tomorrow. Each of you will face a personal scenario designed to test your specific weaknesses. But tonight," she paused, studying their faces, "tonight, you have a different assignment. Write a letter to whoever matters most. Tell them goodbye without telling them why. If you can't do that, you're not ready for Death Brigade." That evening, Fort Thunder was quieter than usual. In barracks rooms and empty offices, 27 elite soldiers struggled with words that might be their last real communication with loved ones. Jake Morrison sat at his desk, his usual confidence shattered as he wrote to his mother. "How do you tell someone who'd raised you alone, who'd sacrificed everything for your education and opportunities, that you were volunteering to not come home?" Jessica Stone had started her letter 6 times. Each attempt dissolved in tears. Her followers knew her as a fearless warrior, but facing her little sister through words on a page broke something inside her. Maria Santos wrote with steady hands, her letter to her father filled with gratitude rather than goodbye. She'd grown up understanding sacrifice, her family's military traditions stretching back generations. He would understand, even if it destroyed him. Emma made rounds that night, not entering, but observing. Through cracked doors and windows, she saw them struggling with mortality in ways that no training exercise could replicate. This was the real test. Not could they die for their country, but could they make peace with those they'd leave behind. The next morning brought individual evaluations that pushed each candidate to their breaking point. But it wasn't physical stress Emma was applying. It was moral, emotional, psychological pressure that revealed character in ways that no amount of training could hide. Kyle Rodriguez faced a scenario where technical perfection conflicted with human necessity. Save the data that could prevent future attacks, or save the wounded teammate who held the encryption keys in his dying mind. He chose the teammate, then spent an hour in the debrief defending why human intelligence mattered more than digital files. Brad Tucker, the joker who'd kicked Emma's bag, found himself in a situation where his humor became a liability. Leading a team through a morale crisis after massive casualties, his attempts at lightness fell flat. He had to learn that sometimes acknowledging pain was more important than deflecting it. Jessica Stone's evaluation stripped away her social media persona entirely. Alone, no audience, no documentation. Would she still make the hard choices? Would she still be a warrior when no one was watching? She emerged from her scenario pale and shaking, having discovered reserves of strength that had nothing to do with likes or followers. But it was Jake Morrison's evaluation that proved most revealing. Emma had designed it personally based on what she'd observed of his character. He found himself in command of a unit where the only way to succeed was to let someone else lead, to recognize that his strength could become a weakness, that sometimes the best commanders were those who knew when to follow. It took him 3 failed attempts before he finally stepped back and let a quieter, more technical teammate guide the solution. The mission succeeded, but Jake looked physically ill as he processed what he'd learned about himself. Leadership, Emma told him in the debrief, isn't about being the strongest or the loudest. At Hellgate, I wasn't in command when we inserted. Staff Sergeant Jackson was. But when he died in the first 20 minutes, command fell to me. Not because I was the best soldier, but because I was the one still thinking clearly while everyone else was in shock. Sometimes leadership is just being the last one standing who hasn't given up. 5 days into the selection, the 27 candidates had been reduced to 19. 8 had withdrawn, not from physical failure, but from honest recognition that they couldn't make the psychological sacrifice Death Brigade required. Each departure was honorable, respectful, and probably saved their lives. Emma gathered the remaining 19 in the same conference room where she'd first revealed the true nature of the selection. This time, she wasn't alone. General Patricia Morrison had arrived from the Pentagon, along with 2 other figures whose faces were obscured by security requirements. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Morrison began, "what I'm about to brief you on is classified beyond top secret. The nuclear facility in question isn't theoretical. It exists. The threat is real, and we have a narrow window to act." The screens came alive with satellite imagery, technical specifications, defensive positions. The reality was worse than the scenarios they had trained on. The facility was a fortress built into a mountainside with natural defensive advantages that made conventional assault impossible. 300 defenders is the low estimate, the general continued. Could be as many as 500. Air defenses make insertion by helicopter impossible beyond this ridgeline, 8 clicks from the objective. Any force will have to traverse on foot through hostile territory just to reach the outer perimeter. One of the obscured figures spoke, voice digitally altered. "The nuclear material inside is enough for 3 devices. Our intelligence indicates they're 2 weeks from completing weaponization. If those weapons leave that facility, we lose any chance of tracking them until they detonate in American cities." Emma watched the candidates process this information. Some faces showed fear, others determination. Jake Morrison looked like he'd aged 5 years in as many days. Jessica Stone had stopped wearing makeup, her Instagram perfect appearance replaced by something harder and more honest. Maria Santos took notes with the same steady hands that had called in artillery on her own position. "Why Death Brigade?" Kyle Rodriguez asked. "With respect, ma'am, why not a larger conventional force or a drone strike?" General Morrison pulled up another image. The facility is built under a refugee camp. 12,000 civilians, mostly women and children, living directly above the underground complex. Any large-scale assault or bombing would be a massacre that would turn the entire region against us permanently. 13 operators. Emma picked up the briefing. Infiltrating through drainage tunnels too small for a larger force, reaching the reactor core and destroying it in a way that contains the nuclear material rather than spreading it. Then holding position until a humanitarian force can evacuate the civilians and regular military can secure the site. "How long would we need to hold?" Maria asked. "Best estimate, 10 hours. Realistic estimate, 12 to 14. 13 people holding a position against 500 for 14 hours. Jake's voice was flat. That's not a mission. That's a last stand. Yes, Emma said simply. It is. The room fell silent as the reality sank in. This wasn't training anymore. This wasn't theoretical. In 2 weeks, 13 of them would infiltrate that facility. In 2 weeks, most of them would die. I need volunteers, Emma announced. Not orders, not assignments, volunteers. Step forward if you're willing. Step back if you're not. No shame in either choice. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Jake Morrison stepped forward. I've been an arrogant fool most of my career, he said quietly. Maybe it's time I did something worth the attitude. Maria Santos followed. My grandfather died at Chosin Reservoir. He held a position alone for 6 hours, so his unit could withdraw. I grew up on that story. I understand what this means. One by one, they stepped forward. Jessica Stone, who'd found strength beyond social media. Kyle Rodriguez, whose technical mind saw problems that needed solving. Others whose names would never be recorded, whose sacrifice would be classified, whose families would never know the truth. When the movement stopped, 16 stood forward, 3 more than needed. Emma studied them, these volunteers for death, and made her selections based on skills, psychology, and that indefinable quality that separated those who could function in hell from those who would break. 13 names, 13 death sentences, 13 heroes who didn't know it yet. The 3 not selected looked relieved and ashamed in equal measure. Emma addressed them directly. You volunteered. That matters. But I need you here preparing the humanitarian response that follows our action. Your mission is to ensure those 12,000 civilians survive what's coming. That's your service. Over the next 10 days, the 13 selected underwent training that made their previous experience look like basic training. Not just tactics and weapons, but psychological preparation for operating after suffering casualties that would break most units. Emma ran them through scenario after scenario, where they succeeded despite losing half their force, where mission completion mattered more than survival. She shared everything from Hellgate, every mistake, every hard lesson, every moment when death seemed preferable to continuing. They learned not just from their own training, but from the blood-written experiences of Death Brigade 2. Jake Morrison emerged as the natural leader, his arrogance tempered by understanding. Maria Santos became his second, her analytical mind complementing his aggressive instincts. The others fell into roles that maximized their strengths while covering weaknesses. But Emma's greatest contribution wasn't tactical. It was teaching them how to face death with open eyes. You're already dead, she told them during their final briefing. Accept that. Embrace it. The enemy can't use fear against corpses. They can't break what's already broken. You are 13 ghosts who haven't stopped moving yet. Your only purpose is to haunt that facility until the mission is complete. On the final night before insertion, Emma found herself again at the memorial wall, looking at her 12 stars. Tomorrow, 13 more would join them. Maybe 14 if the infiltration went wrong early. She'd done everything possible to prepare them, but statistics were merciless. Death Brigade had a 15% survival rate across all iterations. That meant 2 might come home. Maybe. Jake Morrison found her there. Ma'am, he said quietly, I wanted to thank you, not for the training, but for the honesty, for showing us what this really means. Emma turned to him, seeing not the arrogant lieutenant who'd ordered her to remove her uniform, but a young man who'd found something worth dying for. You thank me by volunteering, Jake. Just try to be one of the 15%, okay? His smile was sad. I'll do my best, ma'am. He pulled out an envelope. Could you make sure this gets to my mother? I couldn't mail it. Couldn't risk her figuring out something was wrong and trying to stop me. Emma took the letter, feeling its weight. I'll deliver it personally if necessary. One by one, the others found her. Maria Santos with a letter for her father. Jessica Stone with a video message for her sister, sealed in a secure drive. Each member of Death Brigade 3 saying goodbye in their own way, trusting Emma to be their final messenger. The insertion began at 0200. 13 figures in black disappeared into the drainage tunnels that would either deliver them to their objective or become their tombs. Emma watched from the command center, her trembling hands steady on the tactical display as she tracked their progress through hidden sensors. For the first hour, everything went according to plan. Then, as always, hell arrived, dressed as complications. Contact! Jake's voice crackled over comms. Tunnel security we weren't briefed on. 2 down. Continuing mission. 2 casualties before they even reached the facility. Emma closed her eyes, remembering Thompson's voice, making similar reports at Hellgate. History repeating with different names, but the same blood price. The 13 became 11, then 9, then 7. As they fought through defenses that were stronger than intelligence had suggested, they kept moving, kept fighting, driven by a purpose that transcended survival. They reached the reactor core at 0545. Kyle Rodriguez, bleeding from 3 wounds, began the delicate process of destroying the facility while containing the nuclear material. Around him, the 6 survivors formed a perimeter that they knew they couldn't hold. Brigade 6, this is command, Emma transmitted. Humanitarian forces are 8 hours out, conventional support following. Copy, command, Jake replied. She could hear the resignation in his voice. 8 hours might as well have been 8 years. Brigade 6 beginning final phase. It's been an honor, ma'am. Emma wanted to say something meaningful, something that would matter. But what words could match their sacrifice? The honor is mine, Brigade 6. Hold the line. What followed was 6 hours of combat that would never be fully documented. 6 soldiers, already wounded, already exhausted, holding a position against waves of enemies who understood too late what was happening. The reactor's destruction had been noticed, reinforcements pouring in from every direction. Emma listened to their dwindling communications, heard Maria Santos call out targets with the same steady voice she'd used in training, heard Jake Morrison roar defiance as another wave crashed against their position, heard them die one by one, still fighting. By hour 5, only 3 remained: Jake, Maria, and Jessica Stone, who'd found her true strength not in front of cameras, but in the depths of hell. They'd stacked furniture and bodies into makeshift barricades, turning the reactor room into a fortress that bought time with blood. Command, Brigade 6. Jake's voice was weaker now. Kyle's charges are holding. Facility is neutralized. We are, mission complete. Roger. Brigade 6. Hold on. Help is coming. But Emma could read the biometric data, could see their ammunition counters approaching 0, could calculate the mathematics of survival, and find them wanting. At 0800, Maria Santos's beacon went dark. At 0817, Jessica Stone's final transmission was a laugh, incongruous and defiant. Tell my sister I finally found something real to fight for. Jake Morrison held alone for the final 43 minutes. 1 man wounded in 6 places, out of ammunition, fighting with captured weapons and pure will. His last transmission came at 0900. Command, Brigade 6, can't hold much longer, but they're not getting through. Not while I'm breathing. Emma gripped the console as his beacon flickered. Jake, this is Ghost 7. You did it, son. You held the line. You're a hero. His laugh was more cough than humor. No, ma'am. Just a soldier who finally learned when to stop talking and start doing. Tell my mother. Tell her I wasn't afraid. The beacon went dark at 0907. 3 minutes later, the first humanitarian vehicles reached the outer perimeter. 10 minutes after that, conventional forces began securing the facility. They found the reactor properly destroyed, the nuclear material contained, and evidence of a battle that belonged in legend. 13 had entered. None had left, but they had held long enough. The civilians were evacuated, the facility secured, the weapons prevented from ever reaching American cities. Death Brigade 3 had succeeded at the cost the Death Brigade always demanded. Emma stood before the memorial wall 6 weeks later, watching as 13 new stars were added to the constellation of heroes. The families had been told their loved ones died in a training accident. The real story would remain classified for 50 years, until everyone who might be compromised by its release was beyond harm. Jake Morrison's mother had taken the news with the same strength that had shaped her son. He was proud of his service, she told Emma. That's all I need to know. Emma had wanted to tell her the truth, that her son had saved thousands, maybe millions, that his transformation from arrogant youth to selfless hero had been complete, that he died holding a position alone against impossible odds, because that's what heroes did. But classification bound her to silence, leaving only the stars to tell the story. Viktor Vulov found her at the wall as the ceremony concluded. You trained them well, he said quietly. They performed better than any Death Brigade before them. They trained themselves, Emma replied. I just showed them what they were capable of. What happens now? Death Brigade 4. Emma touched her jacket where a new set of orders waited. There's always another mission, always another threat. And as long as there are those willing to stand in the breach, she didn't finish. Didn't need to. The stars on the wall said everything necessary about those who stood in the breach, who held the line when holding seemed impossible, who chose death to give others life. The ceremony ended with military precision. But Emma remained, alone now, except for ghosts and memories. She pulled out a small case from her pocket. Inside were 14 stars, not the red of team members, but gold for commanders, one for each Death Brigade leader who'd made the selection, trained the volunteers, and lived with the consequences. She pinned the 14th star to the wall herself, not for her service at Hellgate, but for selecting 13 heroes and sending them to their deaths, for carrying their final words to families who would never know the truth, for being the survivor who prepared others not to survive. A month later, halfway around the world, reports began filtering through intelligence channels of unusual activity at a biological weapons facility, the kind of facility that couldn't be destroyed by conventional means without releasing pathogens that would kill millions, the kind of mission that required operators willing to enter hell and lock the door behind them. Emma Hayes stood in her office at Fort Thunder, her trembling hands holding the briefing documents for what would become Death Brigade 4. Outside, new candidates were arriving for selection. Young men and women who thought they were elite, who believed themselves unbreakable, who had no idea what they were about to face. She thought about Jake Morrison's transformation, about Maria Santos's steady courage, about 13 heroes who'd volunteered to die and followed through on that promise. Then she walked out to meet the new candidates, wearing civilian clothes and looking every inch the harmless contractor. Someone had to select them. Someone had to prepare them. Someone had to carry the weight of sending heroes to their deaths. The cycle continued. Death Brigade endured. And somewhere in the ranks of arrogant young soldiers thinking they were immortal, 13 more ghosts waited to be awakened. They just didn't know it yet. As Emma stepped into the harsh Arizona sun, her tattoo hidden beneath layers of fabric, she allowed herself one moment of grim satisfaction. The families of Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York would never know how close they'd come to devastation, would never know 13 names that had saved them, would never understand the price of their safety. But the stars knew, the ghosts knew, and Emma knew. That had to be enough. Death Brigade never dies, she whispered to herself, the ancient motto of a unit that didn't officially exist. They just go darker. Behind her, the memorial wall stood silent, witness to those who'd gone darkest of all, And ahead, new volunteers waited to join them. The mission continued. The sacrifice endured. And Emma Hayes, Ghost 7, sole survivor of Death Brigade 2, prepared to select the next 13 souls willing to trade their lives for others. Because someone had to stand in the breach. Someone always had to stand in the breach. Amid the blistering Arizona heat of Fort Thunder, Emma Hayes' story unfolds as a powerful testament to one of life's most profound lessons. Never underestimate the hidden depths of a person's strength, for beneath every scar and tremor lies a narrative of unimaginable resilience and sacrifice. Mocked mercilessly as a frail civilian contractor in faded BDUs, her trembling hands dismissed as weakness, Emma endured the jeers of elite soldiers who saw only an intruder unworthy of their uniform. Yet, when she revealed the haunting tattoo of Death Brigade 2, a black skull encircled by 12 blood-red stars, marking her as the sole survivor of Operation Hellgate, their arrogance shattered. This was no ordinary woman. She was Ghost 7, the warrior who held off 200 enemies alone for 6 hours after her entire team perished, her body ravaged by explosions that left permanent nerve damage. Her silence amid ridicule wasn't frailty, but forged steel, a reminder that true heroes often wear their battles invisibly, carrying the ghosts of fallen comrades while the world judges them harshly. This tale tugs at the heart, evoking the pain of those who've been undervalued. Perhaps you've felt the sting of dismissal at work, in relationships, or society, your inner battles unseen. Emma's journey urges us to pause before judging, to offer kindness instead of contempt, recognizing that every weak soul might be a survivor of hells we can't fathom. It teaches empathy as a superpower, transforming pain into purpose and prejudice into profound respect. In a world quick to label, let her scars inspire us to look deeper, honoring the quiet warriors among us. If this emotional lesson hits home, stirring memories of your own hidden strengths or times you've been underestimated, drop a comment below. Share how scars, visible or not, have shaped your resilience. Hit that like button if it moved you, and subscribe for more heart-stirring stories of triumph and transformation. Your support fuels these tales. Let's build a community of understanding together.